moving right along, let's do a little catch up on this case. You'll find a link in the description to the playlist of the videos I've already done on this case so far. And this video is just to catch you up to speed as to where we're at right now, while I plug together another video on the pre-trial hearings that have just unfolded. So here it is, everything from my last videos until today.
What do you think his defense might be?
I think at this stage, his defense is really not to deal with the facts of the matter. What his attorneys are trying desperately right now is to get rid of the death penalty. They're trying to raise all sorts of reasons so that the death penalty will not be applicable to this case. They're going back to that enough discovery information has not been presented, as in the Lori Vallow case, and that therefore maybe that's a reason for not to have the death penalty. First they tried that it was cruel and unusual. Nothing is going to work. This is going to be a death penalty case. Then their next attempt, and this is what they're doing just as we're speaking right now, they're in the courtroom trying to get rid of the evidence. They're trying to impugn the evidence that led to various warrants, or even sometimes led to actions without warrants. What they're saying is that the genetic information that the FBI used was illegally obtained. What this means even more specifically, the government is allowed to access certain databases, but some databases such as Ancestry.com and 23andMe, they say the information on those databases are prohibited from federal or police investigators. They are trying to find out, this is the Kohberger defense team, whether or not the FBI, in their zeal to find an answer to who was the killer, access those cases. The judge has so far not allowed them all that information. It doesn't appear that way. If they can impugn that evidence, then they have the fruit of the poisonous tree. If everything that led them to go looking for cell phone records, that led them to have the search warrant into the house, all this ultimately builds to the moment after Kohberger is arrested in January, when they take a cheek swab of him at the jail in Pennsylvania. It's that cheek swab which definitively links him to the DNA on the knife sheath that was found in the murder house. That would seem to make it an open and shut case. But if they can get everything excluded from the case that leads to that cheek swab, that's what they're trying to do. I think it's a long, hard mountain to climb. I don't think they'll succeed, but that's really their only hope at this point.
Suspected serial killer Joseph DeAngelo eluding capture for decades, finally taken down by an unsuspecting relative who uploaded their DNA to GEDmatch.com. Investigators finding a family connection to DeAngelo's DNA, then meticulously working their way through his family tree.
They're getting a new look at the confessed Golden State Killer. Joseph DeAngelo was transferred out of the Sacramento County Jail to North Kern State Prison earlier today. DeAngelo pleaded guilty back in June to more than a dozen murders and rape-related charges. The plea deal he made meant that he avoided the death penalty and will instead serve multiple life-in-prison sentences.
It's not reliable.
You're not asserting that Mr. Kohberger's DNA sample was uploaded into any of those databases, that his was, like, for example, his own DNA was one that was matched from the crime scene. Not asking whether the crime scene DNA was uploaded, but whether he had, as a, for example, customer of one of these companies, uploaded his DNA.
Well, Your Honor, I don't have the GED.com file. I don't have...
You're not asserting that fact, correct?
Your Honor, I'm not sure what the court is asking me.
Well, it goes to whether or not your client has standing to complain about the searches of the databases, because as the state has posited, that wasn't his DNA that was searched. At best, it was his ancestors.
Well, Your Honor, I am not sure why we're here if the state hasn't alleged that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was on the knife sheath.
No, I'm not talking about the knife sheath DNA. I'm talking about what they tried to match it to.
Your Honor, I would answer it this way. The way that those databases work is looking for shared DNA. Those databases don't churn out a name and say this is
I have a
suspect.
privacy interest against any of my relatives that might want to upload their DNA to one of those systems. I should be able to stop them from doing that because I share some DNA with them.
That is certainly not what I'm saying. What I am saying, Your Honor, is if somebody takes your DNA and uploads it, I think you have a privacy interest in your own DNA.
But not necessarily in, let's say my DNA is taken lawfully. What privacy interest do I have in the search of the DNA of others?
That's a loaded question.
Why is it a loaded question? Isn't it a factual question?
Well, it is, Judge, but you're assuming that the DNA was taken lawfully, and our position.
I agree. That part is an assumption. In my hypothetical, I said my DNA that was taken lawfully. Why would I have standing to object to the search of other people's DNA simply because I might share some genetic information with them because they are distantly related to me?
Well, Your Honor, our position is that this work was not done lawfully, that it was unlawful, that there needed to be a warrant, that this was done outside of a warrant. And I'm not asserting on behalf of anybody else in this, any relative, anybody who might have been named or not named. This is about an identification process. It needed to be a lawful process. It wasn't a lawful process. It was in violation of Mr. Kohberger's rights. I don't know how he cannot.
How was it in violation of his rights?
Excuse me?
How was it in violation of his rights?
Well, Your Honor, he's been in custody
You're
for
saying
2
that
years.
I understand your position, which frankly is not well supported in the law, that if hypothetically here, he went to this crime scene, committed these murders, and left DNA on a piece of evidence, that he now has the ability to object to that evidence being searched for identification purposes. There's no case that suggests that concludes that. And it seems to me to be an extreme position to take in light of the case law, and I'm trying to understand how you get there.
Right now, they have a man whose alibi is that at the time of the killings, he was off in a mountain park on a foggy night by himself looking at the stars at 4 a.m. And they have confirming cell phone information saying he was in other places. The alibi is, to my mind, patently absurd, but they're going to try to twist the facts, manipulate the facts, get facts excluded to try to make their case. I think they realize they're not going to be able to do that. What they're really hoping to do is prevent Kohberger from being put to death.
Joseph DeAngelo, the suspected Golden State Killer, has pleaded guilty. The 74-year-old will serve a life sentence and potentially avoid the death penalty. He's admitted to 13 counts of murder and 13 counts of kidnapping in 6 counties. The former police officer, DeAngelo did live in San Diego in the 1960s.
70-year-old Roger Kibbe sat at the defense table. He told the judge he accepted the plea deal, one that will keep his case from going to trial and a jury possibly coming back with a death penalty verdict. In exchange, Kibbe will have to reveal more about his murderous past. Kibbe stands convicted of 7 murders altogether, going back to 1977. Kibbe was serving a life sentence for the 1987 murder of a Sacramento prostitute, but authorities think there could be more bodies buried out there.
Chris Watts was back in court today, this time for sentencing. Earlier this month, Watts pleaded guilty to 3 charges of murder in the deaths of his wife, Shannon, and the couple's 2 young daughters. Before Watts learned his fate, Watts appeared to be shaken while his wife's family condemned him. Shannon Watts was 34 and expecting another child when she and her 2 children disappeared in August. But within days, Christopher Watts was arrested and charged with their deaths. In November, he agreed to plead guilty. In exchange, Watts would not face the death penalty.
Let's go back, Howard, to when you first decided to write a book about it. What was it about this particular case that piqued your interest?
The mystery. Here you have the Kohberger family. You have a father going on a cross-country trip with his son, and in the course of this cross-country journey, he's sitting in a car, shoulder to shoulder with him, and he's coming to the realization, oh my gosh, my son might just be a monster, but he can't quite get there. He can't really say this about his own son. And then you have the victim's family, how they're trying to live in the aftermath of this horror, the compromises that they're trying to make in their own life as they move forward. And then you have the defense trying to build a case which a man, I believe, they think is guilty, that they know is guilty, and yet they're trying to put together a defense. All those elements, to me, combine to make what is a very compelling story, and one I wanted to tell in When the Night Comes Falling.
When Bryan Kohberger, you mentioned the drive across the country with his father. We've since seen the video of him getting stopped not once but twice within like an hour or so. Very short.
9 minutes. There are 9 minutes in between the stops. It's hard to believe. Here he is driving across the country. At this point, when the stops occurred, I was able to find out by talking to people close to the case. Bryan is telling his father about that he has problems at the Washington State University. He's having problems in the department, but he's convinced that he'll be able to overcome them, he'll get a hearing, and that he won't be forced out and he won't lose his fellowship. While this is happening, the father is also noticing his son's mood. When he first came out to the Moscow Pullman Airport and his son picked him up, from that moment on, he knew something was off. He's known Bryan's mood, and now all the pieces are coming together. I mean, the father knew the authorities at this point were looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. He's sitting in a white Hyundai Elantra. He's sitting with his son, who lived just 9 miles or so away from the murder scene, and he knows his son has a volatile temperament. And he's beginning to wonder what this is happening, and then he sees in the rearview mirror flashing lights. The police are coming, and he figures, this is it. Something is about to happen. Then they let them go. It's just a traffic violation. He was tailgating. And then 9 minutes later, it happens again. And the father just doesn't know what to believe, and he just wants to get back to Pennsylvania where he thinks he'll be safe. And so does his son think they'll be safe. But of course, by then the FBI is on their tail and they're closing in.
And so you think that his dad at that point may have suspected that his son could have been responsible?
I think his father suspected, from what I've heard, even before he went out to see his son for the holidays, to drive back across country with him. You have to realize Bryan Kohberger at this point is 28 years old. When he first goes out to school in August, his father, who's 68 years old at the time, or 67 really, makes the trip with him. The family doesn't really have any money, but the father is taking time off to make this trip. He knows his son has problems. He knows his son has a difficult time fitting in. The first thing his father does when he gets out in August to Washington State University, he goes up to someone in the apartment building and he says, "Can you watch after my son?" They're very concerned, the Kohberger family. They know that this was a young man with difficult problems, and they were treating him almost like a child.
So he ends up getting arrested in Pennsylvania. You read about the circumstances surrounding that arrest. It sounds like it could be in a movie. Walk us through, for those people that aren't familiar, as far as taking out the trash and the police coming in the middle of the night, how that all went down.
When the decision is made that Kohberger is a suspect, this is after Kohberger has driven back to Pennsylvania and he's living in his parents' house in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, in sort of a gated compound of once were summer houses, now they're all year-round residences. And the FBI still needs to get more information so they can do the DNA. They need to get a hold of Kohberger's DNA. So the decision comes up, they're going to have what becomes known in police law as the Great Trash Robbery. They go into Kohberger's family's house, the garbage cans outside the house, at approximately midnight. and one state Pennsylvania State Police guy goes into the trash can, grabs the trash, and takes it out, and they have this trash analyzed. They get it sent back to Idaho. What they're trying to do is find DNA in the trash that will match DNA that was left on a knife left behind on the scene, on the button snap of a knife sheath. What Kohberger had been doing is he had been separating his garbage. He had not been putting it out in the family's trash. He'd been putting it into plastic bags. His sister saw him doing this, sorting the garbage into plastic bags. And he was hoping that this would allow him not to get caught. Then the FBI decides to do their raid. They go in with about 40 of the Pennsylvania State Police Special Emergency Response Team. This is a sort of a SWAT team. They're all wearing body armor. They're heavily armed. They go literally crashing through the doors, and they walk in and they find Kohberger in the kitchen. He's sitting in the kitchen in his house, in his underwear, sorting his garbage into plastic bags. They catch him doing this, and they arrest him and take him away.
They've released now what they searched for at his parents' home in Pennsylvania and also in his car. They keep these things under seal for some 60 days, so we just start getting a look at it. But they already have had this stuff in their possession. They seized from the parents' home a knife. I mean, there's no way this guy was stupid enough to keep the knife, but maybe I'm wrong. A knife, a Glock 22, Smith & Wesson pocket knife, some magazines, Taylor cutlery knife with a leather sheath. Here's where it gets interesting. Black face mask. Again, what the roommate said was it was like a COVID mask. So we don't know, not like a ski mask. No. But anyway, black face mask, black gloves, black hat, another black mask, AT&T bill for Bryan Kohberger, a book with underlining on page 118. Love to see what's in there. Prescriptions, cell phone, laptop, multiple dark-colored pants, Columbia Navy fleece. Again, the roommate said he was dressed in dark and black. New Balance shoes. There were reports of footprints belonging to the suspected killer on site. 2 pairs of dark-colored boots, a criminal psychology book, note to dad from Bryan, and inside his car, a shovel. Interestingly, they list 36 dimes, 82 nickels, 8 pennies, gloves, goggles. That one threw me for a loop, Howard. And then they took parts of the car, including headrests, seatbelts, brake, gas pedals, door panel.
You mentioned Bryan Kohberger and us never knowing the why, about why he did this, probably never knowing. But any idea, as far as why that house that night? There's been talk that he was obsessed with one of the girls, one of the victims. And why, was there something particular about that date, about doing it that night? Or do you think it was more of a snap judgment, do it right away type thing?
Here's what I think what happened. And it's speculation, but it's informed speculation. You have to, and to reach my theory, my hypothesis of what happened, I go back to the night in question, the night of the killings, November 13th, 2022. What happens is first, Kohberger drives by the house, not once, not twice, but 3 times. I don't believe he was casing the property. What I do believe, his mind was made up to commit murder. I think he was trying to find the will to become this monster, to cross this Rubicon, and to become this monster he envisioned in his mind. Every time he goes by the house, he's not quite there yet, and he drives away, but then he's pulled back like a magnet, and he returns to the scene of the crime. And when he finally parks his car above the house, and there's an incline to walk down, when he turns off the engine, that's his real commitment that he's going to engage in a murderous act that night. He enters the house through the kitchen door on the 2nd floor. There's a sliding door, it's left unopened. If he was wanting just on a sheer rampage to kill, there are 2 bedrooms filled with students on that level. He ignores them. He walks up a narrow flight of stairs. He seems to know where he's going. There are 2 bedrooms on this 3rd floor. He goes immediately to the one on the right, And I believe that was the bedroom of Maddie Mogan. I believe Maddie was his target. Kaylee Goncalves is sleeping there that night. She's staying in Maddie's room. She really isn't even in school that semester. She's living up in Coeur d'Alene. And she just comes in that night. He goes to kill one girl. Why does he choose Maddie? There's no real logical reason. What I believe probably happened, she was a waitress at the vegan restaurant, the semi-vegan restaurant we went to, the Mad Greek in downtown Moscow, and he might have seen her there. Were words ever exchanged? Did she ever wait on him? There's no record, no documentation of that. But for a man like Kohberger, I think obsessions come to him easily. He had been a heroin addict. He had lost 125 pounds of weight. He did things in obsessive ways. And I wouldn't take much for him to become fixated on Maddie. I then believe he followed her. He saw the parties that were going on in the house. He saw these young people who were living there. And he was an outsider. He was excluded from this kind of life. And their presence, he felt, was a rebuke to him and the life he was living. And the only way he could continue to live, his vanity required that this woman who had excluded him, Maddie, be eliminated. Once he got into the house, everyone else was collateral damage. Again, this is just my hypothesis. It certainly isn't fact, and will take the courtroom for it to be established.
Right, that roommate's going to be a pivotal witness, you would think.